morning. I'm sure you guys all woke up to the news that U.S. and Israel have done strikes on Iran in their capital. From the Iranian Red Crescent, there's reports about like 20 different strikes that have occurred within the capital of Tehran. And we were talking backstage about some of these strikes that happened in Iran, one of them being at a girls' school where there are reports of over 50-ish. I've gotten 40, but Senator, you had said something more to 50 reported dead of children. And I want to pass it to you. I know there are still news coming out. We have Iran doing retaliatory strikes against Israel and bases, U.S. bases, all throughout the region. So good morning, Senator. I know it's a little bit of a somber morning. We have been predicting this for a while, and unfortunately it comes to fruition with this administration. I want to pass it to you, and I know that the President of the United States addressed the nation at 2:57 a.m. Eastern Standard Time last night with a pre-recorded clip addressing why we were going to war with Iran. And I'll play a little bit of that clip a little bit later on in the show.
Yeah, that's right. Morgan and I have been discussing with you for several weeks now that a joint Israeli-U.S. attack was imminent, that the decisions had in all likelihood been made about how this would be carried out. We did mention options, the possibility that there could actually be some genuine aspect to the peace talks and so forth. It's interesting that the peace talks were taking place in Oman. Oman, it's an interesting place where the government of Oman, sort of prides itself on being kind of a neutral broker where people can talk peace and have discussions. And I think they were very anxious to be involved in these discussions because they do favor peace. And so the foreign minister of Oman, who had been very intimately involved in the peace negotiations, Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, and he said that that so much progress had been made, and that Iran had agreed to give up so much that it looked possible that there would be a deal today. Or, actually it would have been a deal at the time that the airstrike was being carried out. But it's important to understand that Israel has the major role in laying this out. We're the party that executes the plans that they have. But one of their techniques, Israel traditionally does this, where they will choose to get operational surprise by engaging in peace talks and then launching a surprise attack during peace talks. And this was the case here. Mm-hmm. Literally, it appeared as though Iran was just going to give us pretty much whatever we wanted. And the foreign minister of Oman said he was very pleased. He said it looks like it will be possible to reach a deal tomorrow. So I think perhaps that was one of the things that went into the thinking, is that if if there was anything left on the table to be determined, it would perhaps make it more awkward to carry out this strike. The, the purpose of the negotiations and all was simply cover for the strike so that you would have operational supplies. Even though there was a big buildup in all of this, um, there were stories planted about how very possible that this would be a very limited strike. Um, and it does not appear as though that is the case. I think that was probably a pretext. Because I think in the end, what's the goal of this? The goal has nothing to do with Iranian nuclear power. They have never said that they wanted to produce a bomb and repeatedly said they don't. Uh, International inspectors have repeatedly said there's no evidence to support the fact that Iran is producing a bomb. And in any event, Iran had agreed to international inspections, to reducing nuclear um, their nuclear program to almost nothing, permanently diluting all of the nuclear materials that they had. So they had given up almost their entire nuclear program in negotiation. So this is just a pretext. It's like, oh, we've got to stop them from getting a nuclear bomb. They weren't going to have a nuclear bomb.
Yes, and I think it's important for us to remember Operation Midnight Hammer, which happened no less than a year ago. I would say that Israel primarily did those strikes, but we kind of aided in the providing the coordinates. Murdered a lot of the nuclear scientists in Iran, very prominent high-up nuclear scientists. So you're basically cutting the program short, or even if there was a program to begin with, because you can't, train a nuclear scientist overnight, especially if you're, and I say, it was a blatant murder because it was in their home with their families, and all of their families had died too, along with their children. But even greater than that, we're going against even our own intelligence assessment. We talk about this probably about a year ago, is the CIA's 2025 threat assessment that, the Tulsi Gabbard would put out, and basically says that the Iranian government is nowhere near building a nuclear weapon. They haven't even gotten through the political sentiment of building a nuclear weapon, which means that the pushing it towards their people and getting the people's acceptance to build a weapon of mass destruction. I thought that was very interesting, and it is very interesting in the sense that the Trump administration is going against the Trump administration's own words in the CIA's assessment.
Sure. Now, another issue. Now, of course, that's nothing, but I think that Israel is genuinely concerned about the growing capacity of Iran to produce missiles that can strike Israel. Because what Israel wants to do, they don't like casualties. They don't like to have their people suffer. They'd like to be able to kill at long range and to suffer no casualties at all. So the idea that somehow Israel could suffer in a war like the wars they impose on other people, that has got to be ended. And so there is this genuine concern about the fact that Iran has very bright people. This is not a primitive culture like Afghanistan. Iran has an ancient, very highly sophisticated culture with very intelligent people. And so they do have a great deal of capacity to comprehend advanced scientific things and that sort of thing. So this is one of the issues is knocking out the ability to 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 punch back. Israel wants to be able to go out if anybody says something they don't like, if anybody puts up the slightest resistance to the mass slaughter of people in Gaza, they want to be able to reach out and kill them and suffer no consequences. So that's what's going on now. It is interesting that in the airstrike that killed 53 elementary school children, Israel carried out the strike, and I think in part where there are going to be clear violations of the law of war. Israel has no regard whatsoever for for legalities and that kind of thing. They're willing to slaughter people quite mercilessly, and so that's the kind of thing that were the United States to go in and to bomb an elementary school, it would have a backlash with the American people. But as long as it's one step removed, and it's not actually Americans that are killing the children, then politically it kind of works. So it's the same type of thing that we see happening in Gaza, where under the guise of peace, 600 people in Gaza have been killed that we know of. We don't know how many people. I mean, enormous numbers are dying of starvation and disease and so forth, because all the resources are cut off to them. But in any event, we're likely to see where there are clear war crimes committed. We're likely to see that by Israelis rather than the Americans being directly tied to it.
More that we engage in these tactics, and I see very little daylight. I would like to think that we're different than the Israelis, but it's turning to be that we're merging with Israel, where there is very little daylight between who is doing what kind of thing. I would like to turn to play some of the address that Trump added to the nation last night, and then we could discuss on that.
Okay.
We'll soon learn that no one should challenge the strength and might of the United States Armed Forces. I built and rebuilt our military in my first administration, and there is no military on earth even close to its power, strength, or sophistication. My administration has taken every possible step to minimize the risk to U.S. personnel in the region. Even so, and I do not make this statement lightly, the Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission. We pray for every service member as they selflessly risk their lives to ensure that Americans and our children will never be threatened by a nuclear-armed Iran. We ask God to protect all of our heroes in harm's way, and we trust that, with his help, the men and women of the armed forces will prevail. We have the greatest in the world, and they will prevail. To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or, in the alternative, face certain death. So, lay down your arms. You will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
It's going to be interesting to see what the reaction is within Iran. Um, we worked with the CIA, Mossad, tried to create a domestic uprising in Iran. I suspect, although there's no proof of it, but I suspect that the tremendous inflation there was caused by an Israeli operation to flood uh, fake currency into the markets. I say this just because this is commonly done. It's not like this is some unique thing. This happened during the Revolutionary War, where the U.S. currency, or the colonies. I don't know what. I guess we were the United States when we were fighting the Revolutionary War, but we issued currency called the Continentals, and the British have very very well documented and historically documented program where they flooded uh, the 13 states with counterfeit funds, and just really made the currency worthless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my immediate takeaway is the similarity that it draws upon our engagement in Iraq. It was about the weapons of mass destruction, the nuclear weapons as well as the chemical weapons pertaining to Iraq. And then it turns into, oh, we're bringing democracy, we're liberating the people. It draws so many similarities that I honestly, a bit of annoyance is struck in me because people have this amnesia. What did the engagement in Iraq get us? Over 1 million dead civilians in Iraq. No weapons of mass destruction were found. The city it's still trying to recover from what we had done. And in terms of domestically, we are 30 some trillion dollars in debt. It did not, bring us any kind of fruit of engaging in that war. And for us to continue to think that this time is going to be different, it brings me a little bit of irritation that people can't see past our government's delusion that if you continue to do this thing, it's in pure insanity. We keep engaging in these countries overseas, saying that it's going to strengthen our liberties, our rights, and then it does the exact opposite. We have a country whose infrastructure is being completely neglected. We are, again, 30 some trillion dollars in debt ticking each day. And we continue to expand ourselves overseas. Right now we have our service members who did not agree to fight this war or have any legitimate reason to fight this war are now being attacked. You have the air bases or the naval bases in Bahrain. You have, we spoke about it backstage, the U.S. consulate. There were bombs heard in Kurdistan. I mean, this is serious. We have Americans all spread around, the Middle East, for lack of a better term, that are in in danger right now. And for what? I don't think that the Iranian government serves an immediate threat to me in my daily life.
Yes, if you go back to Midnight Hammer last year, where we engaged in that 12 days of war, and Israel they've been at war for a long time there. But what happened is the Iranian government, because of domestic politics of Iran, they felt compelled to fight back. They couldn't just sit there. And so they launched a fairly considerable drone attack on Israel. But the way that they did it is they leaked intelligence to the United States deliberately. They communicated with us. They said, okay, we're going to tell you exactly when and what direction and so forth. And the U.S. actually cooperated with Iran and then shot down almost all of those drones and missiles. Few of them were allowed to go on and hit in places that were relatively inconsequential. So there were very few casualties inflicted on the Israelis, and that was sort of a diplomatic dance between the United States and Iran to contain things. I think you're going to see a totally different thing this time because um, uh, Iran has prepared. They've seen what happened the last time. They know what's coming. They understand that it's going to be much greater than the last time. They also know that their leadership is targeted. Mossad spy agency, the CIA had gotten deeply entrenched in Iran, and and so we were able to kill a lot of top leaders, scientists, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
and so this time they put in place a plan that has replacements 4 levels down, and then it even goes beyond that. So they strengthened their chain of command enormously, and that's going to mean that there always are leaders in power automatically, and you can knock this one out, and the next one steps up. So that has taken place. And the other thing is that they did this diplomatic dance with us during Midnight Hammer, the operation we did last year, and they saw what happened. You know, in the end, a lot of their leaders were killed and so forth. And so this time, I think they're looking at it in a much more sober aspect, where they understand that we're going there to kill all of their leaders, to overthrow their government, to hopefully bring about an uprising. Uh, and short of that, then we intend to destroy the industrial capacity of Iran, the perhaps housing, perhaps big housing projects and so forth, much like we did. Well, we didn't do it, but we helped um, Israel destroy all of the housing in Gaza to where people are just left homeless in the sun, in the rain, whatever happens. And so they, I think they're much more sober this time, and they recognize that uh, they can't just sit there and allow their uh, defenses to be destroyed. And so I think we're going to see that diplomatic dance this time. I think when they use their drones and their missiles, they're going to use them for maximum effect.
Mhm.
And it'll remain to be seen what the reaction is.
Mhm.
Know that there's this hope on their part, on Iran's part, that by striking American facilities in the Arab countries, it will turn the Arab people against the United States.
Yeah.
We we don't know what will happen. It could play out either way. Now, I saw in Saudi Arabia has already joined the war on the side of Israel, and
Yeah, I
so
think this comes at a very interesting time. I'm not sure if you caught it, Senator, the interview that Tucker Carlson did with Mike Huckabee, who is the ambassador to Israel. There is this thing that Middle Eastern countries came out and critiqued, I would say rightfully so, which was Tucker Carlson addressing Mike Huckabee. What is this historic land of Israel? Where does it stop? during his understanding of the Bible, it encompasses a lot more sovereign nations beyond the conquest of the rest of Palestine. And Huckabee basically says, well, it is what it is, kind of thing, where you had nations in the Middle East coming against that, saying, are you kind of basically giving a wink and a nod to Israel to continue to do this acquisition of land into Syria? There are parts of Saudi Arabia that will be taken, Iraq, and it extends very far. We have spoken about it numerous times on the show, which I think is so important for every American to hear and to know and have that knowledge in the back of their brain, which was General Wesley Clark's alert of what he had heard right after 9/11. I have this video. I'm going to go ahead and play it for the viewers.
After 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
So it's important to note that Lebanon is divided in factions. You have the southern part of Lebanon that is in control of what's known as Hezbollah. Syria, Somalia, all of those nations, Libya, they're all in turmoil. The last standing nation that is standing on its own with its leaders would be Iran.
That's right. The idea is to weaken and destroy the nations surrounding Israel, and not the ones that are, immediate, sort of a threat to them or something, but the entire region. And you look at what Mike Huckabee said, and he was basically saying, well, we shouldn't have any objection if Israel wants to expand enormously. And he didn't use those words, but that was essentially the message. He might disagree, but he was very blunt about it, and clearly it involved the land of Syria, of Iraq, of Egypt, and it just went on and on. And if you look at it, shortly after the 9/11 attack, we began this planning. Now, understand that when you're talking about wars and foreign policy, it's not at all like national politics, which sort of is constantly moving and shifting, and one side gets an advantage and then the other. With foreign policy, ideas are put in motion, plans are put in motion, and they go on sometimes for generations of generations. Now, it has been a quarter of a century since it was revealed that we had laid out this plan to take down 7 different nations in 5 years. Now, why didn't it take 5 years? Principally because Syria just fought this phenomenal resistance that went on for 13 years, fighting against 2/3 of the world's industrial, financial, and military might. One little country of 23 million people, so determined that they would resist foreign aggression and Al Qaeda and ISIS, which were all interlinked with the CIA and Mossad and various things. And so they were a huge stumbling block that they just refused to go down. And then finally, we just starved them into submission, and the whole country just collapsed at the end of that time. Now we turned around and we put Al Qaeda in power. And if you listen to the words that were spoken by our former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, Wesley Clark, he asked, he says, well, what, have we found some link to Al Qaeda? And the answer was no. And Americans were told we're launching this war on terror. Bush and Dick Cheney started it, launching a war on terror because of Al Qaeda. Here we go, years and years. Within just 10 years after 3,000 Americans were killed in the biggest strike on American land in history, here we were allies with Al Qaeda and the CIA under Project Timber Sycamore, a very highly secretive program that was disclosed later. We had warehouses right across the Syrian border in Turkey. The CIA operated them, funded them, everything, and we would release weapons to Al Qaeda. Sometimes we use proxies to, make sure that we didn't get our hands dirty with it, but we made sure that they had what they needed. We made sure that ISIS had what it needed, and so 10 years after we were supposedly attacked, I mean, we were definitely attacked by these suicide hijacked jet airliners that crashed into the Twin Towers in the Pentagon. That definitely happened. The people who hijacked definitely were Al Qaeda linked people. Almost all of them were Saudi Arabians. And, I suspect that there were very top level American officials who cooperated with Saudi Arabia in those attacks on the United States. I don't think it was entire. I think part of it was to shock the American people into this feeling, well, we've got to do something. And then from that point forward, we launched this enormous series of attacks within the Middle East, attacking one country after the other, typically using terrorists, ISIS, Al Qaeda, and overthrowing government after government, and carrying out this plan that General Wesley Clark, disclosed to us. And it's, even though it wasn't on schedule, it's just this ceaseless, endless series of maneuvers to carry out the plan. And Iran is the end of the plan that we were hearing there, but I think the plan has grown, and I think that Russia is in the crosshairs, and China is in the crosshairs.
Yeah, That's a very, very important point to bring up, and we had discussed this before. And I want, definitely want to come back to that, but I want to make a mention of what we had spoken about a few weeks ago, which is America exerted a lot of resources, taxpayer dollars, to move prisoners out of northern Syria
Yes.
into prisons in Iraq, which borders Iran. And I think that that kind of draws on what you were just talking about. There is this plan that may be forming, that it's a multi-front operation where you will be injecting or trying to infiltrate Iran through radical Islamists like ISIS by, causing turmoil in that country. And I think that that is predominantly the reason why we would exert so much effort in moving those prisoners closer to Iran. What is your take on that?
Yes. Interesting you bring that up, because the present war has no ground component whatsoever. It's supposed to be simply dropping bombs, massive numbers of bombs, missiles, and so forth. And I think there is tremendous desire on the part of the Pentagon and part of Mossad to generate a ground component. Now, Iran, because of what happened with Midnight Hammer and the preceding Israeli strikes, they learned a lot from that. They're smart people, and they learn from experience. And one of the things they recognized is that a tremendous number of Afghan immigrants had come into Iran. They didn't have a great loyalty to Iran, but they came as workers. And so after the attacks on Iran, they made the very tough decision that they were going to push all of those immigrants out of Iran. They moved 1.5 million people out, and these are people who were laborers, on construction sites or whatever, and they just made a hard decision. Okay, we're at risk, and Mossad has been able to infiltrate these folks because they don't have any loyalty to the country. So I suspect that the U.S. and Israel had placed a great deal of reliance on the fact that they could infiltrate and they could get assistance from the Afghan population there. But now that is largely gone. So what next? Now, there's one part of Iran that has a significant Kurdish population. That is always a very restive population, whatever nation they happen to be in. And I think they were involved in these recent protests that became so violent. But they need more. They need more manpower, and just recent reports. We abandoned our wonderful program that the Kurds had to have their own country, and we were going to carve out northern Syria. Well, the reason we carved it out is because the food that fed Syrian people came from that area, and the oil that provided fuel and transportation and so forth, that came from there. So we set up the Kurdish state and basically stole the food and the fuel that people had to have to survive, just to live. So the Kurds were a convenient tool, and I cautioned. They wanted to hear from me. I had Kurdish leaders from around the world. I didn't invite them. They asked, could we come and have a meeting? And I said, yes, that's fine. And they came and they said, look, we're trying to figure out what to do. The U.S. wants to set up this enclave, and we kind of like to do it, and we just like to have your thoughts. So I just gave just a neutral analysis, sort of from their perspective of what it would mean. And I said, look, just understand that they're carving out an area where you have two very hostile nations on your borders. Turkey despises the Kurds. Iraq is very much against you. And I said, now Syria is the only place. This is when the Syrian government was still a normal government, and I said, you can make peace with Syria, and then you'll have one country that's on your side. I said, otherwise, you're going to be surrounded on three sides by hostile nations. And I said, they're going to use you until this conflict is over. And then they're leaving. I said, you're going to be at the mercy of Turkey. And in any event, that has all transpired. We used them we very carefully preserved the ISIS fighters and population rather than killing them as you normally would in a war. And just recently, we've allowed the Al-Qaeda government, the new government of Syria, that's Al-Qaeda, we've allowed them to move these people, tens of thousands of them.
I believe it's like 70,000 in total.
Is it that high now? Okay.
Of ISIS members that are imprisoned in northern Syria, yeah.
But anyway, tremendous numbers of ISIS fighters, and we're moving them into Iraq so that we get them closer to the border with Iran. And my thinking is that if this proceeds in the direction it's going, that we will introduce them into the ground combat. They'll become the ground combat element. And here's the irony. The whole war on terror started with this attack of the Al-Qaeda suicide pilots who flew the planes into the Twin Towers. And now here we are, our ground component in waging war against Iran is going to be ISIS. The most hideous, ISIS is more hideous than anything the Nazis ever imagined doing. They literally crucify people, and then they mock them as they're crucifying them on the crosses. They burned people alive. They set up slave markets where they traded in little girls to be raped by jihadists. I mean, hideous stuff. And here, all of a sudden, all of this is whitewashed. American people, they don't have a clue because memories are short unless you're focused on this.
There's got to be something in the water, Senator, because I somehow remember. It is this full circle moment. And I would even extend it to Operation Cyclone, which goes into when the Soviets were injecting themselves into Afghanistan. We boosted up the Mujahideen that would turn into Al-Qaeda. So if you look at it from that scope, it is just this circular motion of just pure insanity.
The CIA was overseeing an army of 300,000 jihadist terrorists. And we had imported the most radical imams from Saudi Arabia to come into Pakistan and parts of Afghanistan. And they set up these madrasas where they trained illiterate, just orphans, young boys who had no future, who knew nothing, and they did nothing but just inculcate them with jihadist ideology, with this 7th century Islamic just hatred of everybody, and they unleashed it on the Soviets. They did it successfully. The CIA viewed this as, I think, their greatest achievement at the time that they drove the Soviets out. They had celebrations as only the CIA does, which is they're very quiet, but everybody knows they're ecstatic. And it was a tremendous achievement. The problem is that once you train people in that level of hatred, it doesn't just go away. And unfortunately, once the CIA had done this, they said, look at this, look what we could do with terrorist armies. Things that we can't do with our uniformed people, we could do through people who can do anything. They're not limited by law and warfare like American troops are. American troops are very decent, very good. I love our troops. Don't get me wrong, but the CIA, Mossad, British MI6, they're able to do things that civilized people would just be aghast at if they knew that we were doing them. But they're done all in secret, and they're done using these jihadists. The ones that we declared war on terror against are now our warriors to overthrow other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Senator. I know that we are going a little bit over time, and there's so much more to talk about. I know that we had touched upon the role of BRICS in this situation, which BRICS, Iran is very close within BRICS. A lot of oil gets funded through the Strait of Hormuz. All of that is very, very important to think in broadening the scope of what really is happening here. But unfortunately, I think we are kind of going a little over time. So I guess maybe I would like to end it with some of the, the propaganda that's pushed for, why we need to hate Iran. It is the state sponsor of terrorism, or, women's rights are so infringed upon, so we have to bomb the nation. I just want to maybe get your final closing thoughts with those two kind of prompts in mind.
Well, anybody who's tempted to think that somehow we're on the side of virtue, keep in mind Saudi Arabia is now part of our alliance with Israel, and there is no place that I know, no major country that is more repressive and more dictatorial than Saudi Arabia. You have one man who is able to order 40, 50 people beheaded because he says so. It doesn't. You don't need anything more than the crown prince to say the word. So the idea that somehow we're and women, they said, oh, we're going to allow women to drive cars, and then there was a prominent Saudi woman, prominent in cultural things, and she said, oh, this is great. So she started going online saying, oh, we're going to start driving. They arrested her. They threw her in jail because you're not supposed to say that. It's one thing for the government to put it out, it's another thing to do it.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, as for the state sponsor of terrorism, during the first Trump administration, General Soleimani was taken out, and you had written great lengths of the efforts that Soleimani did to drive out ISIS and radical Islamists from reaching Iran. So I think that's also very important to keep in mind that the role.
He was one of the principal architects of the defeat of both ISIS and Al Qaeda, and had all these other things not been done afterwards to salvage them, Syria would have ended terrorism in its country, restored order, and but we couldn't have that, and so we have always backed the terrorists from day one in the Middle East, and I see nothing to suggest that will end. So thank you for being here with us, and we'll get
Yeah.
together again next week.
Yes, yes. I would encourage everybody to tune in next week to focus on the news. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.